Hey there, I'm Benjamin from Loves Data. In this video, we're going to cover Google Consent Mode v2. If you haven't implemented Consent Mode yet, it lets you send details about people's consent choices to Google. We're going to cover what it is, whether you need to use it, and walk through the steps to set up Consent Mode v2. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Cookiebot for sponsoring this video. Cookiebot lets you add a consent banner to your website, and as we'll see in a moment, it means we can quickly and easily implement Consent Mode v2. Okay, let's start by explaining Consent Mode and the difference between Consent Mode v2 and the previous version, which is sometimes called Consent Mode v1. Overall, Consent Mode lets you tell Google if someone has provided consent when they visit your website. For example, if you want to create a Google Ads remarketing campaign that targets people located in Europe, you'll need to implement Consent Mode. If you don't, data collected from people based in Europe won't be available in your Google Ads account for remarketing. Consent Mode works with the consent banner on your website. If you're using a consent management platform like Cookiebot, it will automatically pass people's consent preferences to Google. For example, once someone clicks Allow All on your consent banner, cookies will be stored on their browser and all of the information will be available in Google Analytics, Google Ads, and the other advertising and analytics platforms you're using. Google has also said they're strengthening the enforcement of their EU user consent policy. Let's take a look at this policy. It says that you need to obtain consent from people located in Europe to use cookies and to use data for ad personalization. This means even if you're only using Google Analytics on your website and you're not using Google Ads, you might still need to implement Consent Mode if people located in Europe can visit your website. So that's something you'll need to consider. Okay, now you might be wondering what's the difference between Consent Mode v2 and the previous version of Consent Mode, which is also called Consent Mode v1. Let's take a look. When Consent Mode was first introduced, it let you tell Google if people had provided consent to store analytics and advertising cookies in their browser. To do this, we could set values for the analytics storage and ad storage parameters. For example, when someone came to our website, we would set the default consent state to denied, and when they granted permission for cookies to be stored, we would change the values of these parameters to granted. The values of denied and granted are then included with data that is sent to Google. So with the previous version of Consent Mode, also called Consent Mode v1, we set values for analytics storage and ad storage. In order to meet legal requirements in Europe, Google released Consent Mode v2. Let's take a look. This version still includes the analytics storage and ad storage parameters, but it introduces two new parameters for consent. These are the ad user data and ad personalization parameters. The ad user data parameter tells Google if someone has provided consent to have their data used for advertising. And the ad personalization parameter tells Google if someone allows their data to be used for personalized advertising. This includes remarketing, where you target ads to people after they've left your website. Now that I've covered the difference between Consent Mode v2 and the previous version, I'm going to answer the top questions about Consent Mode. First up, do you need to implement Consent Mode? To answer this, I recommend asking yourself the following questions. Are you collecting data from people located in Europe? This includes collecting data into Google Ads and Google Analytics. And are you running remarketing campaigns in Google Ads that target people located in Europe? If you answered yes to either of these questions, then you need to implement Consent Mode. If you answered no, but you might in the future, then you should also consider implementing consent mode sooner rather than later. And just to highlight, you will need to implement consent mode before you can start building audience lists for your remarketing campaigns in Google Ads. The next question is, what happens if consent mode isn't implemented? If you're not collecting any data from people located in Europe, currently nothing changes. However, if you want to run remarketing campaigns in Google Ads and you haven't implemented consent mode, then people located in Europe won't be added to your audience lists. Google's EU user consent policy says you need consent to use cookies. Based on my tests, data will still be available in Google Analytics reports for people located in Europe even if you don't implement consent mode. And while this is what I've found, it doesn't mean you should wait to implement consent mode. Google, along with the European regulations, require that we have consent before we collect and use personal data, which includes browser cookies. Next up, is consent mode required for tracking conversions in Google Ads? If you want to track conversions from people located in Europe, then you need to implement consent mode. This is because Google Ads uses cookies by default and collects information that falls under the European regulations. So you do need consent to collect this data and send it to Google. If you're not tracking conversions from people located in Europe, then currently you don't need to implement consent mode. However, user privacy requirements are evolving, and it's probably best to be ready for more changes when it comes to data collection and privacy. And while you can track conversions into Google Ads without consent mode, using consent mode means available cookies will be used for more accurate reporting. Plus, with consent mode v2, Google Ads can use data modeling to fill in missing conversions. The next question is, if consent isn't provided, will data be collected into Google Analytics? This depends on if consent mode has been implemented, and if it has, it will also depend on how it has been implemented. Basically, if consent mode hasn't been implemented using a consent banner on your website, then based on my tests, you'll still be collecting data from people located in Europe into your reports. If you have implemented consent mode and consent isn't provided, basic information or hits will be sent to Google Analytics. If you collect enough of these basic or anonymous hits, Google Analytics will use machine learning to provide model data in your reports. It will take some time for model data to become available, and a minimum amount of data is required for data modeling. If you don't meet these minimum requirements, model data won't be available in your reports. Finally, what's the difference between advanced consent mode and basic consent mode? Using advanced consent mode means that tags for Google's platforms, like the Google tag for Google Ads and Google Analytics, will automatically adjust the data they collect based on people's consent preferences. For example, if you're sending data to Google Analytics, basic information will be sent to Google Analytics before consent has been granted. Then, when consent is granted, cookies will be created and the tag will send all of the available information to Google Analytics. Using basic consent mode means that no data will be sent to Google's platforms until consent has been granted. Until consent is granted, no data will be sent to Google Analytics. We've now covered what consent mode is, the difference between consent mode v2 and the previous version, when we need to use consent mode, and what happens if we don't use it. Now we're going to walk through the steps to implement consent mode v2 using Cookiebot. Let's head to Cookiebot. If you're just getting started, I've included a link to Cookiebot in the description below this video. Since I've already created an account, let's begin by entering the URL of our website. We can then choose one of the predefined templates, or choose to customize our consent banner. Since consent mode is now required for users based in the EU, let's select the GDPR template. This will give us pre-configured settings for our consent banner, which makes setup quicker and easier. And let's click Next. We can now adjust the design, content, and other elements of our consent banner. Since we selected the GDPR template, I'm going to leave the defaults, but you can adjust the settings for your consent banner. For example, we can choose between dialog and bar. Dialog will appear on top of your website, while bar appears at the bottom of people's browsers. Selecting design lets us adjust the colors and button styles. We can choose to use the light theme, dark theme, or select our own colors for the banner. I'm going to leave light selected for my banner, but you can choose an option that works with your website and branding. And we can adjust the style of the buttons. If you're on a premium plan, you can also upload your logo. Now let's select Compliance. This lets you control when the consent banner appears and the options provided to people visiting your website. And under Distribution, you can choose which users will be asked for consent based on their geographic location. Since we're implementing a consent banner to use with consent mode, and we previously selected the GDPR template, we can see this is set to EU only, but you can adjust this if needed. Next, we can select the Content tab to review the text used for the consent banner and buttons. Again, I recommend leaving the defaults. And selecting the Privacy tab lets you adjust what people see after they've selected an option on the consent banner. By default, there will be a small icon on the bottom left corner of your website after people have selected their consent choice. This is where people can adjust their consent. Again, I'm going to leave the defaults, and let's click Next on the top right corner. Now it's time to implement Cookiebot on our website. We're going to use Google Tag Manager to add the Cookiebot consent banner. But if you're not using Google Tag Manager, you can use one of the other options. For example, if you're using the Google Tag on WordPress, you can use Cookiebot's WordPress plugin. Since we're going to use Google Tag Manager, let's click Finish. And let's select Implementation. Let's scroll down and copy the domain group ID, as we'll need this in a moment. Now let's head to Google Tag Manager. If you're just getting started with Google Tag Manager, I recommend watching my tutorial series to help you get up and running. You can find a link to this in the description below this video. The first thing we need to do is enable a consent overview. This makes it easy to see if consent settings have been defined for our tags. To do this, let's navigate to Admin. And let's select Container Settings. Now let's ensure that Consent Overview is enabled at the bottom. And let's click Save. Now let's navigate back to Workspace. And select Tags on the left. We can now see the Consent Overview icon on the top right corner. Let's select this. We can now see a list of all of the tags in our Google Tag Manager container. All of the tags listed at the top under Consent Not Configured need to be reviewed. We will come back to the Consent Overview in a moment, and I'll show you how to do this. For now, let's close the Consent Overview. And let's navigate to Templates. In the Tag Templates section, let's click Search Gallery. And let's search for Cookiebot. Let's select the Cookiebot template and click Add to Workspace. And click Add again. Now let's navigate to Tags. And let's click New to create a new tag. Let's name the tag Cookiebot. And let's select Tag Configuration. Now let's search for Cookiebot and select it. We need to paste the domain group ID we copied from our Cookiebot account. We can see there are some additional settings, but let's leave the defaults and look for Default Consent State. By default, the consent state will be set to denied for all of the consent mode parameters. However, you can set different defaults for different geographic locations. I'm going to leave this, and let's select Triggering. And let's choose the Consent Initialization All Pages trigger. This will ensure that Cookiebot is loaded before any other tags on our website. Now let's click Save. The Cookiebot tag will now automatically adjust how most of the tags for Google's platforms function. This means they will automatically respect the consent settings people choose on our website. However, we might have some tags that don't have built-in consent settings. For these tags, we'll need to create a new trigger. So let's navigate to Triggers. And let's click New to create a new trigger. Let's name the trigger Cookie Consent Update. And let's select Trigger Configuration. Now let's choose Custom Event as the trigger type. And let's enter cookie_consent_update as the event name. This needs to be all lowercase. Now let's click Save. We can use this trigger that we've just created for any tags that don't have built-in consent settings. We've now added Cookiebot to Google Tag Manager, and we've created a custom trigger for tags that don't include built-in consent settings. So the next step is to check the consent settings for all of the tags configured in our container. To check the consent settings for our tags, let's navigate back to Tags. We're going to use the Consent Overview again, so let's click the Consent Overview icon on the top right corner. We need to check the consent settings for all of the tags listed under Consent Not Configured at the top. Let's start by selecting the Cookiebot tag. Since this tag is used to manage consent, we need it to fire every time someone visits our website. So let's look for Consent Settings under Advanced Settings. And let's select No Additional Consent Required. Now let's save the tag. We can see the Cookiebot tag is now listed under Consent Configured. Now we need to configure the consent settings for the tags still listed under Consent Not Configured. My tip here is to look for any tags that don't have any values listed under the built-in consent column. These are the tags that don't have built-in consent settings, and will need to have the custom trigger we created applied to them. We can see the Conversion Linker, Google Ads Remarketing, and Google Tag all have values listed under the built-in consent column. This means all of these tags will automatically adjust based on people's consent preferences. So if someone hasn't provided consent yet, these tags will send some basic information to Google without creating any cookies on their browser. Instead of editing each of these tags individually to adjust the consent settings, let's select the checkboxes to the left of the Google Ads Conversion Linker tag, the Google Ads Remarketing tag, and the Google Analytics tag. Now let's click the Edit Consent Settings icon. It looks like a shield with a configuration icon. And let's select No Additional Consent Required. And click Save. And click Save again. All of these tags are now listed under Consent Configured. Now let's open the Microsoft Advertising tag. Under Consent Settings, there are no built-in consent settings, so let's select Require Additional Consent for Tag to Fire. And let's click Add Required Consent. Now we need to select Add Storage, along with Add Personalization, and Add User Data. Next, we need to change the trigger for our tag so that it only fires once consent has been granted. To do this, let's select Triggering. We need to remove the Initialization All Pages trigger and add the Cookie Consent Update trigger. Now let's save the tag. All of the tags are now listed under Consent Configured. So let's close the Consent Overview. The next step is to test that our Consent Banner and Consent Mode v2 is working. So let's click Preview. We need to enter the URL of our website. And click Connect. Our website loads. And we can see our consent banner. Before we make a selection, let's open the Tag Assistant tab. We can see the Cookiebot tag has fired, along with the Google Ads tags and the Google Analytics tags. We can also see the Microsoft Advertising tag hasn't fired yet because we haven't provided consent yet. Let's select the Google Analytics Measurement ID at the top. And let's select the Page View event. We can see the Cookie Consent State parameter has a value of G100. This means that consent hasn't been granted yet. It also means the tag has collected some basic details without storing any cookies in our browser. Let's head back to the website. And let's click Allow All on the consent banner. Now let's navigate to another page. And let's open the Tag Assistant tab again. Let's open the new Page View event. We can now see the Cookie Consent State parameter has a value of G111, which means cookies are now being stored and all of the available information is being sent to Google Analytics. Let's close this. And let's select the Google Tag Manager Container ID. We can now see the Microsoft Advertising tag has been fired too because we granted consent. Okay, let's head back to Google Tag Manager. And let's click Submit to publish our container. Let's name the version. And click Publish. We're now using Cookiebot to integrate our tags with Consent Mode v2. Remember that whenever you add new tags to Google Tag Manager, you will need to check the consent settings for those tags. Have you implemented Consent Mode? I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments. If you'd like to learn more about Cookiebot, Consent Mode, and Google Tag Manager, please check out the extra resources in the description below this video. And please subscribe to this channel for all of the latest updates. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.